During the 16-bit era, beat-em-ups enjoyed an incredible amount of representation. From the arcade classic Final Fight to Sega's own Streets of Rage, beating up bad guys became a regular activity for kids all over the globe. The genre covered everything from serious revenge stories to comical settings in far-off worlds. But with the switch to 3D polygons, the beat-em-up took a backseat to racing, fighting, and adventure games, almost disappearing entirely as 32-bit home consoles began their rise. Famed developer Technosoft, known for their Thunder Force series of shoot-em-ups, tried keeping things two-dimensional early on at the Japanese PlayStation launch with Nekketsu Oyako. Roughly translated, it meant hot-blooded parent and child, or as it's more commonly known, hot-blooded family. It was a shock to see this since so much was being made about the PlayStation's 3D capabilities, and it looked like something you'd see on the Super Nintendo. Die-hard Sega fans wouldn't have to wait long to get their shot at it because Technosoft would port it to the Saturn a mere 8 months later. Unfortunately, those not familiar with the import scene missed it entirely thanks to both versions remaining Japanese exclusives. The question is, was it any good, and is it worth playing today? I hope you guys enjoy my review of Nekketsu Oyako, Hot-Blooded Family. The gameplay here is very easy to get into thanks to a mix of easy directional taps and Street Fighter style inputs. The 3 selectable fighters each feature certain fighting techniques that can feel quite a bit different from one another. Rando is a slow and powerful wrestler with a Ryu-like uppercut and multiple throws, while Ryo is small but fast and uses a hammer to beat down her foes. Finally, there is Tora, who has some nasty combo attacks that you can spam regularly. As with many beat-em-ups, getting in multiple hits make up the majority of the deeper gameplay here. Most of your attacks can juggle enemies many times before they hit the ground. Ryo and her hammer can deal a dozen hits at a time if you link her moves together. They can cancel into one another as well. Tora's combos can also lead to some insane juggles, and his whip-like sword special can hit a huge portion of the screen many times. When in trouble, you even have a screen-clearing nuke attack that hits everything around you. It's important to note that the R trigger is more than just your run and dash button. It also locks you in the direction you are facing to help you keep your attack moves clean and concise. There are also a few touches that depend on the character you choose. Only the older Rando can drink beer and use heavier weapons like missile launchers. Of course, like most games in the genre, you get boss encounters as you go. These are usually against enemies that can knock you out of your combos and special attacks, making them much more difficult to deal with. One of the more unique attributes of this one is the stage variety. While it starts out pretty similar to the Final Fights and Double Dragons before it, you'll soon find yourself inside a whale, atop a moving roller coaster, and inside a volcanic cave. The settings are all over the place considering it's just 5 stages. As I mentioned earlier, Nekketsu Oyako looks like a 16-bit brawler through and through. Visually, there is nothing special going on here at all. It's colorful, has decent-sized sprites, but it's nothing you haven't seen on the Genesis and Super Nintendo in similar fashion. It's definitely not ugly, however, and the animation is actually quite good. Each of the fighters' combos and special attacks come off clean and distinctive from one another. Perhaps the biggest disappointment here are the backgrounds, most of which you see are flat representations of buildings, theme parks, and hotel lobbies. When you do get some parallax scrolling, it's a big help to the visuals and makes you really wish the rest of the game was loaded down with similar techniques. Since the Saturn release is a port of the PlayStation original, there are some noticeable differences in their graphical presentations. Nearly every single transparency here has been reduced to a dithered mesh, and that comes off as much less impressive than it did on the PlayStation. Everything from the shadow under the fighters to the water splashing around you is a downgrade on Saturn. Fortunately, that's not the case with everything. The Saturn sees additional animation frames added to the main cast of fighters and their enemies, and you'll notice additional background effects as well. On the whale stage, the PlayStation features a simple flat background with a wavy effect, while the Saturn sports a full layer of line scrolling that looks a ton better. Finally, while it runs great 95% of the time, there are moments where slowdown pops up and messes with your timing. It's not often, but it's there, which is a head scratcher considering the 16-bit style visuals. Another area where the Saturn gets a boost is in the soundtrack. It was good on the PlayStation, but Technosoft redid some of the tracks to sound even better. It worked too, because what is here is actually quite solid and adds a lot to the presentation. Let's have a listen to a few examples. So what's the final verdict on old hot-blooded family here? While I admit this is far from the best beat-em-up I've ever played, I still found myself enjoying it. The characters are different enough to warrant a few playthroughs with each one, and the stages are a wacky mix of genre tropes and comedic nonsense. Battling on top of a huge whale as fish are jumping all around you is quite surreal, as are the boxing glove-clad octopi. It certainly doesn't take itself very seriously, and can be a blast with two players. The Saturn version does see a number of improvements over the original PlayStation release. New music, new moves, more animation, better backgrounds, and a more forgiving juggling system all highlight a better experience. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't say I expected more. I expected a larger variety of moves, more story, more stages, more enemies, more bosses, and better graphics. You often hear about repetition in these kinds of games, but here, it's real and unmistakable. As far as enemy variety, you fight the same handful of street punks the entire way, and in the last stage, you'll even fight the bosses a second time. This was kind of a lame cop-out when both the Saturn and PlayStation had CDs that could have held much more variety beyond simple palette swaps. You only need to spend 5 minutes with something like Guardian Heroes to see how incredible enemy variety could be on these machines. It's also crazy short and quite easy on anything but the hardest setting. 2 players will blow through normal in 45 minutes on the first playthrough, and your kids can comfortably keep up with you on easy. This certainly affects the replay value heavily. But for all its faults and weaknesses, Nekketsu Oyako still benefits from the simple fun of beating up bad guys with a friend. This can be more than enough reason to revisit it a few times, and for the more diehard among you that crave these experiences, it might even be worth owning. While a great many people during the 32-bit era were happy with polygons and new and exciting gameplay, I lamented the fact that many of my favorite genres fell to the wayside. Side-scrolling beat-em-ups almost completely disappeared, and what we did get didn't push the genre forward very much. And even when something did try to give us something new, it wasn't expanded on with follow-up titles. Where was Streets of Rage 4 with its RPG elements, branching paths, and expandable movesets? Where was Golden Axe the Revenge of Death Adder? Other game types matured, evolved, and became something that gamers continued to want to play, and sparkling new 3D engines. I think Treasure had the right idea with Guardian Heroes. Beat-em-ups needed to change and grow into something new. They needed more content and variety. They needed more to keep your attention. With that groundwork laid, Hot Blooded Family seems ancient in comparison. Not just visually, but in the gameplay department as well. It certainly has its unique touches, but those moments are swallowed up by the feeling you have been here and seen all this before. For some of you that won't be a bad thing, but for others, it'll be a confirmation as to why this genre fell so hard from grace. For those of you interested, there is an English translation for the PlayStation edition of the game, though none exists for the Saturn version. I'd say it's still worth a visit if you're a diehard fan of the genre, but if you're expecting a Streets of Rage type of experience, you're gonna come away sadly disappointed. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.